In Conflict, a representação oficial portuguesa na 17ª Exposição Internacional de Arquitetura da Bienal de Veneza, em 2021, integra um ciclo de 9 debates. In Conflict propõe revisitar uma seleção de processos da arquitetura nacional pós-25 de Abril, pautados por um amplo debate público e pelo envolvimento dos poderes políticos, da imprensa e da sociedade civil. Iremos dar início à sessão de debate. Agradecemos aos nossos parceiros oficiais, aos coordenadores dos eventos, aos participantes e a todo o público.
Bom dia. Vai ser difícil competir com esta voz que esteve antes de mim, tão profissional. But I will try. This conversation will be in English. And I will start with the words of an anthropologist that I really admire, Eduardo Viveiros de Castro. Another world is possible because another world has always been possible, or rather, it does always on the idea that another world is possible. And if another world is possible, we can debate which way to go. If towards expansion, the domestication of nature, colonisation, urbanisation, and acceleration, or we can change the path of progress towards contraction, slowdown, re-naturalisation, and history repairing. But the paths are winding, and somehow we are all committed to something other than what we should be doing right now. And because we are living in conflict, and in order to survive, we need to negotiate, make alliances, and resist. It is based on the experience of resistance that we invited the historian Gérard Lambert, founder and spokesman of ASIPA, an organization that contributed to the creation of a place where a group of citizens resisted to the project of a new airport, taking into practice in the same place an alternative way of life. Okay? Bearing in mind that we need to deepen the debate on the repair of history, and that, this need is also a form of resistance against heritage narratives that celebrate colonialism, we have invited the artist Ângela Ferreira, whose work is focused on the impact of colonialism and post-colonialism on contemporary society. Ângela will share with us a series of works titled The Talk Towers, showing us several voices of resistance. Now I'm talking about the next person that we invited, Paul Tavares, but he cannot be in presence. He's in Brazil. And about him, I have to say that perhaps no one has suffered as much with the so-called progress and subsequent invasion, devastations, and genocide as the peoples of the Amazon. However, no one resisted like them either. And to talk about this resistance with resistance as a form of existence, we invited Paul Tavares, that is in Brazil right now. I hope he can join us to talk about the work he has been doing about and together with these communities of Amazon. Also, how can we look for representation of less powerful cities, of less powerful ways of life in cities? Can the outline of a riverfront question the institutional powers when it is committed to them? This is what we ask to our final speaker, Rui Mendes, an architect whose activity is essential link to the architectural practice and who, for some years now, has been working on a territory and riverside ecosystem in the south bank of Lisbon, where the possibility for the construction of a new airport has been under study. So after presenting our amazing guests, I kindly ask Gerard to start. Okay. This is yours.
Yes, as Fernanda told you, I've been invited here to present to you a very creative experiment that is taking place in France, near Nantes, a city situated by the Loire River at the southern end of Brittany. It is the fruit of a struggle that lasted 50 years. I will talk only very briefly about this struggle because it would take too long to explain the full story, and also because I would like to share with you mainly the positive aspects of this experiment, what has been created and what is still active today. But I have to present the context briefly so that one understands how this came to life and gave birth to one of the most interesting creations of what I like to call concrete utopia, in reference to a famous quotations, "They didn't know it was impossible, so they did it." This place is called ZAD, standing for Zone à défendre in French, area to be defended. It all started in 1967, when the government decided to build an airport in the countryside next to a village called Notre-Dame-des-Landes and reserve 1,650 hectares for it. So we have the first photos. Yeah, you see the place. The population, mainly composed of peasants, reacted strongly against this project. The fight against it lasted for years. At moments, the government seemed to give up, but others came and started it again. The opposition grew. Associations of opponents were created with all kinds of people supporting the peasants, inhabitants of the region, defenders of nature, trade unions, mayors, and even pilots. It organized loads of actions, demonstrations with tractors, occupying building, interventions in public debates, publications, etc. On these pictures, you see 14,000 people demonstrating on the main road leading to Notre-Dame-des-Landes. And in 2007, a new step was taken that would amplify the situation and give it a more important status than that of a simple opposition to the airport project. The local opponents invited people to occupy the empty farms and houses, or to build new houses on the land and to cultivate it or start creative activities on it. Soon, the area was occupied by a few hundred people, and all kinds of original buildings were built without legal authorization. Some of them very strange, as you can see. The activities developed quickly, and many semi-deserted places were revived. The wastelands were cultivated again, loads of vegetable gardens flourished, cattle and sheep herds grew larger, a bakery, a brewery, a cheese factory, a pottery, a mechanical workshop, a nursery, a radio station, a silkscreen printing workshop were all created. All of this enabled with the help of the peasants and local opponents who were pleased to see their movement being reinforced by this creative wave. This provoked the decision of the authorities to put an end to what they saw as a defiance of their rule, to expel the squatters. They wanted to destroy the buildings and the cultivated fields and gardens. In 2012, a powerful police intervention was confronted by very strong resistance and had to give up its ambition to clear the zone. After the complete destruction of a few houses, but increasing difficulties to destroy the others, the police forces decided to retreat from the central area and only to control it by surrounding its borders. 2 weeks after this decision, more than 40,000 people came to help rebuild the houses or build new ones, forcing their way through the police barricades and bringing building materials from all over the country. Students from the School of Architecture of Nantes built a prefabricated house that just needed to be assembled. Yeah, on the photo you see other people helped to carry all the equipment and to assemble the houses. The police had lost the battle. The ZAD came out of it reinforced. For 6 years, the government kept organizing a kind of guerrilla war against the place, but finally gave up. In January 2018, the airport project was officially and definitely abandoned, and the ZAD was still alive. It is this experiment that we will explore now. But before that, we will show you a very short film made in 2016 for an appeal to assist in one of the last demonstrations in defense of the ZAD. Not only because it shows clearly the strengths of the opposition, but mainly because it gives a very good idea of what the place looks like and what kind of atmosphere it evolved. We now see the film, and I will read the comment in English because it's in French. I'm sorry for that, but okay. I had never been there. I brought my stick, just one among many others, stuck in the ground that day. And while we were sticking them deeply into the earth, we all made an house. If the government tried to expel the ZAD of Notre-Dame-des-Landes, we would come back. It was incredible. 40,000 people united. October 8, 2016. The government, no one came. They still hadn't succeeded in destroying all of this in order to build their damned airport. For 50 years, the people had been fighting against it, against another of these deadly machines that destroy the climate. And what I discovered there, more than the people's perseverance and more than the beauty of the landscape, was that this place is a kind of strange miracle, imperfect, of course, but of a potency able to repulse the ugly storms that are increasingly blowing. Today, I was watching the news on television, burning forests, drowning migrants, the ice floes melting, the biodiversity collapsing, and walls being built everywhere. And in the middle of these accounts of disaster was a report on the ZAD. Today, we enter the dark, hidden center of the ZAD, a no-rights zone. No rights? Yes, if you mean right to destroy what is alive, right to concrete over the nourishing land, right to value profitable life. But there are other rights. The rights to be different, to be charmed by a place, the right to build your own house the way you want to, the right to decide together what kind of life we want. The day after the gathering of the sticks, some inhabitants of the ZAD gave us a tour of the place. We saw salamanders coming out of the mud and others being carved onto the beams of a new barn. We heard a new song coming out of the recording studio. We drank brown beer from the brewery. We spread compost on the vegetable gardens. And while the flour mill was turning, we ate some fresh bread out of the oven. A peasant whose family have been here for 7 generations showed us his cows. They are like him now, squatters. The pirate radio was on. We heard people quarrel about the future while cleaning the potatoes. We even climbed on the top of the lighthouse, built where the control tower of the airport was planned. We enjoyed losing ourselves in the forest. That weekend, I understood what community means. It shook me a lot. When I went back to town to work, I felt really strange. You know, if they try to build their airport, I'll be there against them. And even if they give up, I will come back. Wanting to destroy this experiment is like wanting to render hope illegal. And that's the end of the film, yeah. By declaring the end of the airport project, the government has also hoped to put an end to the ZAD, using the argument that because the airport plans had been abandoned, the ZAD had no reason to keep existing. But the ZAD had proved to be more than just a simple protest against the airport. It had become a place where attempts to practice new social relationships, new ways of living, of working and producing were experimented. Help and solidarity rather than competition, common services rather than selfish business, free market and canteen, medical care, transport, sharing of tools, etc. And it kept resisting to its planned destruction. After a difficult period of new police assault and the destruction of a part of the ZAD, the government, confronted by the threat of reactions throughout France and even abroad, decided to apply a softer strategy. The Daddists were offered a precarious leases, providing that they would be connected to an agricultural activity and had to be signed by individuals. The Daddists, who had practiced the collective management of their activities and refused to consider their farming work being separated from the rest of the activities on the ZAD, did not want to submit to this plan. Wisely, they agreed to sign the leases, but connecting them together as part of a collective project, and they kept on acting as a community, taking their decisions in regular meetings involving every member of the community in a kind of direct democracy, without hierarchical organization. There are no bosses. Every decision that concerns the collective is decided by the collective after an open debate, sometimes long and conflictual, but aiming to reach the widest agreement without ignoring the problems. There are no permanent representatives, but delegates that are assigned by the Assembly and are under its control. Practicing this collective management, the Zadis kept on building and creating, considering that the more they would prove to be positive, the more difficult it would be to destroy their commune. This brings us to one of the richest aspects of their activity, what one could call their savage urbanism. A great number of buildings have grown in this zone, submitted to the agreement of the community, and in respect of the cultivated land and the property of the historical peasants, but of absolutely free conception. From the renewal of old farms to new houses, workshops and meeting places, some of them quite classical, but some of them extremely inventive and amazing. You will see a few photos. Yeah. And it is not just barracks, as one could imagine. A group of carpenters have built a workshop, and exploiting the wood in the forest that covers a third of the ZAD, they produce wooden material to build houses and barns that look wonderful. Yeah, more photos. No. You're stuck? I wanted you to show the barns. Okay, well, I keep reading because Well, yeah, it's coming. Yeah, that's one of the houses. It's in fact the only one that had a plan drawn before. Most of the houses have been improvised completely. Natural resources like earth and straw are being used a lot, but one can also find combinations of occasional equipment recycled from its original use. Here are the barns. You see that it's not just barracks, it's real good work. The story of the lighthouse is a good example of this. It is built exactly where the control tower of the airport was supposed to be. One day, a man working for the National Electricity Company came and told the Zadist he had a high voltage line piler that he could bring to the Zad if they had any use for it. They immediately decided to turn it into a lighthouse that would prove the skills of the Zad as much as its determination. Welders transformed it into a tower, and a great number of people helped to erect it by hand with cables. It was amazingly precise and efficient. You have seen this lighthouse in the film, and you see it now on this photo. Although they sometimes seem quite disorderly, these buildings do take into account the needs for water and the necessity of sewage disposal. Electricity is mostly produced by solar panels or wind turbines. When they are for communal use, the required equipment needs are discussed by the collective. The Zadists are supposed to respect the decision, especially the ones concerning the need to avoid damaging nature. The plantations and gardens are grown without pesticides and without the excessive use of mechanical tools. The animals are fed naturally. The activities are not planned hierarchically and authoritatively. Each individual or group live as they like to do and do things the way they want to do. But most of the activities take into account the interests of the community, and there is a lot of solidarity. When a project needs a certain number of people to achieve it, they are not difficult to find, as you can see on this picture. Around 200 people currently live on the Zad, but many supporters come to help for a day, or a week, or a month, or more. Some houses are designed to shelter them, and the Zad organizing regular visits, guided tours to discover the nature, teaching workshops, herbalism, silviculture and woodwork, baking, mechanics, etc. The intention is to be open as widely as possible and not become a ghetto like other preceding experiments of this kind. They have a good library, here it is, that invites writers, organizes thematic debates, and even welcomes international delegations for discussions on worldwide social issues. They produce various publications and have an internet site that does not only describe the activities of the Zad, but relays information about other similar experiments in France and abroad. Each year, they organize a land art show and a great festival with concerts, debates, cultural shows, food and drink that hosts thousands of visitors. Relations with the government are still conflictual, but came to a standby with the pandemic. This gave the Zadists a moment of respite that they used to consolidate their position, developing their activities peacefully and purposefully. This Zad is today one of the richest experiments of alternative living in the world, which proves that another type of social life is possible when enough people join in forces to create it. And here are some of the people under that, some of the inhabitants. Thank you.
Can I go? Start. Good morning, everybody. So I'd like to start by thanking the organization of the Portuguese representation for the Architecture Bienal this year, and particularly Fernanda Fergateiro and Jorge Carvalho for including me in this panel. I hope I can contribute with something useful here. I'd also like to thank Gérard for the most amazing presentation. Really, I'm in awe of your activism, so thank you so much for that. Let me start. I'm not sure how much I will need, but, oh, it's me, okay. I should also just say that I was hoping to have bigger images for you to see. I'm not sure how much people in the back are going to be able to reason with what I have, but my presentation actually starts here. So, as way of introduction, I should just very quickly talk a little bit about my art practice, because what I will show you today is not necessarily representative of the whole of my art practice, and it needs a little bit of contextualization. My work has in fact been developed very largely around issues of political pertinence to do with the relationship that Europe has with Africa, obviously focusing on issues of colonial, neo-colonial, and post-colonial problematics. I have used extensively, I've used architecture as a text to read and interpret in order to make artistic, sculptural interventions. And along the years, I have found that working in the subjects that I chose often leads me to very serious and heavy projects that are very critical, that require quite a strong stomach, because they often point to very sad issues, very violent times in people's lives. And round about in 2008 or 9, I started strongly feeling the need to embark on a component of work that wasn't negative, that didn't always portray particularly Africa as a tarnished continent and Europeans or northern inhabitants of the northern hemisphere as aggressors. And in order to do that, I started looking for ways to further my references to more utopic projects, and also to look for, and this is what's important in our in my talk today, to look for role models of people that would be mostly African, but not exclusively African. Today will be a good example of how they mix. But role models of people that represent the world that I believe is the correct world, and the world that I believe is a more democratic, for the lack of a better word, world. So, not there, sorry. So sorry, getting a bit confused still here. So I started as a sculptor. I started looking at towers, and again, I think it's an interesting connection with Gérard's presentation, and I started looking at towers from a very particular point of view. First, as a sculptor, the tower is obviously something that marks the landscape. It gives a sign of some sort. And although they are not built, and I'm talking about communication towers, that becomes evident already in this image, they're not built as sculptures, but in fact they are none other than very large public sculptures. So you can either see them in a landscape approach, the way they mark and signal something, or you can see them the way they mark and they signal things in an urban landscape. And I started thinking of communication towers particularly as a way to start dealing with my wish to disseminate ideas about more positive role models, and to think of them as often as models or prototypes for eventual larger sculptures. So I'm not starting with what we arranged. I'm sorry, I've deviated a little bit from our plan, but so I'll start with one of the first projects in this context. And can I ask you to give me a 15-minute call? Like somebody keep time on me, because I have a lot of images I might not get. So I started looking at how towers sit in the landscape, how they function in a landscape, but also I started becoming very interested in the invisible waves that are created that run along landscapes. And particularly I was interested in radio towers, meaning specifically towers that transmit radio. And last month I was in Mozambique, and I had a privilege to visit Radio Mozambique, and I took the top left image just as I walked into the building for my visit. And it was another moment where I could remind myself of how important radio was. The role of radio played during the liberation struggles in Africa was of major importance, as it was in Portugal before the end of the revolution. There was, as we all know, a radio that transmitted from Algeria to Portugal called Portugal Livre, I think it was called. Well, so in Africa, the same happened. There were radios transmitted many times from London, sometimes from Algeria as well. And these were often the ways in which liberation movement elements communicated whilst they were in the rural areas fighting. Anyway, so on the right-hand side, the archivist of Radio Mozambique showing me the card of the registration of Samora Machel's independence speech, Independência Proclamação na Machava, and a young worker of the radio station today. So I was also reminded of the fact that, in fact, the first product that independent Mozambique constructed after its independence was a radio. It was this radio, a Chirico. And so, in a way, radio plays an enormously important role in communication and social construction, pre-independence and post-independence. The image on the left, which is really where I start working, is the image of a radio tower in a rural village in Mozambique. So for those of you who know Africa, that you would know that many villages still today have something which is called the communal radio. So it's just a radio put together in a very basic way by people that live in a village, and they all take turns to go and create programs. These radios often only work between 3 in the afternoon and 8 in the afternoon, for example, but they are community radios run by the community. And of course, not everybody has the money for that, so these are transmitted publicly. Oops, getting confused here. So I did a series of drawings based on this, and I started, I was at the time working on a project for a public art project in Austria called Steirischer Herbst. And I was really struggling to find a way to do something in Austria because Austria didn't colonize, so it was difficult for me to establish a connector until I found Peter Blum, who's a South African poet with a very interesting story. Peter Blum was actually born in Vienna, and his family left Vienna because of the Anschluss in 1936. His father was a psychiatrist, and they immigrated to South Africa. Peter arrived in South Africa, in Durban, when he was 12 years old. He was educated in Cape Town and at the University of Stellenbosch. He was a librarian, but he also wrote poetry. Now, what was interesting about Peter Bloem's poetry was that it was written in Afrikaans, which was the language of the apartheid regime, so it was literally the language of the oppressor. But Bloem used the colloquial language of the street in what was then seen as a very challenging to the apartheid regime's confrontation with the idea of language. And he wrote 6 beautiful poems called Kaapse Sonette, in which he describes the city of Cape Town. So he will describe, one of them, for example, is called Talking About Monuments, and he describes all the so-called apartheid monuments for what they are, ridiculous marble wastes of time and money, according to Bloem. Anyway, he was then applying for his South African citizenship, and because he was a naughty poet, he was denied his citizenship and forced to leave South Africa, ended up dying in London, a very sad death, basically doing translations for technical books. So what I did was I got permission, I recorded the poems of Peter Bloem, I translated them into German and had those recorded and constructed a tower which was loosely based on the tower that I showed you drawings of a minute ago. And so in Volkspark in Graz, where the project took place, we transmitted Peter Bloem's poems. And it was a bit like bringing Peter Bloem back to Vienna, but bringing Cape Town back to Vienna. So taking one city to another city via, how do I...
Die miljonairs kom by deur Peter Bloem. 'n Pellie van my wat daar werk as kok, het my vandag laat inloer in die huis van die ou miljonair, sy baas. Kom bys. Jy sou gesê het, is die Duncan Dok, China en mesgoed tot aan die nok, frigidaires vol geprop met pikfyn vleis, eiers, vrugte en groentes op die ys en die hele karkas van 'n soort bok. Toe sê hy, en die keller is in 'n kroeg, whisky en brandewyn, gin en muskadel.
So I imagine very few of you will understand Afrikaans, and we would not have time to wait for each sonnet to finish to go on to the English version and then on to the German version, but that gives you an idea of what it worked, how it works. My idea is very much to refer to utopian structures as a kind of a way to think our life again. A lot of the utopias were failed. In this case, even the Africa utopia was failed, but I think we need to go back to them, we need to rethink them. Anyway, what needed rethinking for me, in fact, was the sculpture. I was particularly unhappy with that rendition of Kaapse Sonette, and I pursued my way through a sculptural exercise, making a maquette, first of all in bamboo, and then by 2014, I was lucky enough to develop this rendition of the work for the Tamayo Museum in Mexico City, and going back much closer to what my original drawings were, and in fact, much closer to what the Mozambique Tower that had originally inspired me, I finished off with this work, which I was particularly happy with. Also very nice is the fact that the museum saw good in this project and acquired the project, so it stayed in Mexico. So the work has a kind of history of traveling as well and moving along. So I'll go on to my final project. Talk Tower for Ruforuxite is now one of my more recent works, and a lot has happened about towers and about the idea of role models. Ruforuxite was an Iranian poet and filmmaker. She was born in 1935, and she is considered the sort of mother of modern Persian poetry. She was the first woman that isn't technically African that I decided to pay homage to in this series, and so the last of the project. She was a young girl, married off by her parents when she was 16, was very unhappy as a married woman. She left her husband and joined forces with a filmmaker who was really the love of her life. She was ostracized by her family, badly treated by the regime. But amongst that, she wrote very soulful, very sad poems. She died at the age of 32 in a very strange car accident that hasn't really been explained. And because of those elements, Faurou seemed to be one of the perfect person to reference in one of my works. This just helps you understand how, for example, you can see a part of her poem where she says, perhaps life is a child returning home from school. Perhaps life is the lighting of a cigarette between the lethargic intervals of two lovemakings. The red portion of the poem, for example, was censored. So we had to work really hard to find the uncensored poem, even today. And so I started looking at towers and the meaning of towers in Iran. And this is in Tehran. This is the Milad Tower, the famous telecommunication towers in the city. This is also a telecommunication tower. It's called the Everard Tower, and that also shows you a few drawings that I started making about it. And these were the ones that interested me more because they actually were referring more to how communication, radio waves transmitted along the landscape and the country. And then I started being interested in how my own towers, and I started developing a series of drawings where you can see, for example, on the bottom right-hand side, the Mozambique Tower, which first travels to Graz and then travels back to Johannesburg and finally goes to Mexico. The other tower you see here, I will not be showing you, it's the Ingrid Yonka Tower, which starts with the Shukov Tower in Moscow and then travels to Basel and then to Cape Town. But when I was researching Iran, I discovered the Centre, which was an agreement in the 60s, round about the time when Faurou was beginning to write and make her mark as an artist, was an agreement between these three countries, Pakistan and Iran, to develop networks between them, understanding the kind of geopolitical importance of the region. And what I sort of got engaged with maps and how the maps traced the explorations overland and underland, so there could be maps of how the microwaves distributed, or railway maps, highway and port projects. And I was interested in how these traced the country. And all this refers to the fact that I see my towers as kind of methods and objects of transmission. So I found this stamp, which is a celebratory stamp for the Centre project, and directly based on this stamp I started drawing for Faurou, for Rukhsat. And this would be a set of drawings and images that I would use in the showing of the sculpture that complements, and this is what the sculpture actually looks like. So it's got a base, which is an old wood cutting machine from a wood workshop with a pretty violent looking saw. So it takes me back to my own practice as a sculptor, and again using the megaphones to transmit sound. In this case, I was particularly lucky because
که تو را در خود تکرار کنان به سحرگاه شگفتنها و رستنهای ابدی خواهد برد. من در این آیه تو را آه کشیدم آه، من در این آیه تو را به درخت و آب و آتش پیوند زدم. زندگی شاید یک خیابان دراز است که هر روز زنی با زنبیلی از آن می‌گذرد. زندگی شاید ریسمانی است که مردی با آن خود را
So, some details to just finalize my presentation. Some details of the sculpture. And some bibliography. Thank you very much indeed.
Just a brief note to say that Paulo Tavares cannot join us from Brazil, so Rui will start. Thank you. And thank you, Angela.
Está ligado? Está. Então, em inglês. So first, I would like to thanks to the organization and also to the invitation of Fernanda and George to meet this marvelous panel to discuss. And as they put on the demand, I will show a project that is a pleasure to show this project, an ongoing project. So it's something that I would like really to discuss here. So I would like to start to maybe to explain the title. This is a project that, so the aim of the project is to build a public and a collective space. And the idea is really to use the basin of Montijo and that relation with the city airport that is already there. But nowadays, as we all know, it's in a way of being transformed from the military use to a civil use, which is really something different. Can I use this? Yes. So, just the context, this is the Tejo Bay and the Lisbon area. You can see in the yellow, light yellow, the position of Montijo and this airport platform. So it's a huge element inside this basin, this lagoon. And as I was saying, the platform for the airport was settled in the middle of 20th century, exactly 1953. So that conflict is already there. It's already related the position of the airport and also the small village of Montijo. So this is a drawing from the 60s, I guess, a military drawing. And this is the new position for the new airport that is, we don't know exactly the point of this decision, but it's a decision. And this is the work that we are doing. We are doing this, I'm doing this with Fernanda Fragateiro and also with Marta Labastida. So we started already before this decision of transforming the airport, and we would like to show now what we are really doing in this place. So addressing to this discussion of the conflict, this is the first model we did. The model we did to relate all scales, like is said there, and to start thinking about something that we can relate at one time, all scales, and try to go to the studio and work with this idea of all scales. And this started well with I just have this picture, an old picture, just to explain that all of this basin in Montijo was used by people working, fishermen working, a lot of stuff to help people working in this place. And nowadays they are completely ruined, they are completely abandoned, but these beautiful banks are still there, and this fragile space is really the most complex space and richest in biophysical systems, and that is really the material that we would like to use for this, well, I should say, difficult but ambitious project, which is, so this is another picture from the airport area, beautiful place, as you see. So we started to invent and to put these ideas on a schematic schemes. This idea about using this beautiful biophysical element to start to think about what can be, what can we use from this beautiful place to rebuild and to use that ruins that they are physical, well, damage, but mostly all of them, they are not public. So this was well, really I think it's cut. Really the problem is that we are facing this beautiful place which is almost not a public space. So we tried to map, really to make a map with this to keep all of the public elements, like these canals, no, that relate the water with the earth. We try to collect them, to keep them, and to inform the municipality that we'd like to keep these very thin elements, to invent something that can establish public positions with some new programs to, well, to avoid to keep on selling to, well, private positions. So, and we start to use some, well, some ideas, some references to, well, to settle this idea about using very, very thin elements and small elements to activate this, all of this line, this area that connects the basin with the earth. And we are trying to inform the municipality that maybe this is somehow a way to protect all this area, acting in a very small positions and with small programs. And this was the end of the first well, half of the project, and we could make a public presentation with all of this, with all of these first schemes about this idea about using small things to put everything together, and based on this, somehow we call it voids. They are voids that are connecting the water with the earth. So we could establish a first, well, a first position to face municipality and to ask them to go ahead with this project, using some well, some quotations and some well-known thinkers like Lefebvre and also Gilles Clément, and that beautiful book by Ernst Schumacher, Small is Beautiful. So we restart, after this, with this presentation, so we collect everything in the studio, and we invited all of the municipality to come to the studio and to see this. And it was really a very important day, because at the end of the day we could ask everyone about what they are thinking about this possibility, and we after this we could have, well, a little commission to start doing some small project. And we are now in this second level of the project, we think. So this was the presentation. Then we collect everything. So now we are really working on the ground, searching for that little pieces of public elements in between the huge hearse that it's not public, it's private, but we are doing this to collect them and to make them as a huge project of small, very small little uses. And so we are doing this very slowly, we guess. And we are now constructing the first one, which is, I don't know how to point this. It's on the left. It's the no, it's not possible, no. So we are drawing, make these drawings with all of these pieces. Most of them, they are really void. They are empty spaces. So we are collect them and trying to now use them with new programs, with new small programs connected to the life of the inhabitants, and we really would like to make another presentation with the new elements, and mostly we are, well, lucky to start to build something which for us it's completely part of the same idea, which is doing this research, doing some project in the studio to help us to go to the ground again, and now we are doing the first project, which is a garden, because we would like to address this idea of depavimentation also, to keep this possibility to the infiltration make a big role in this idea. So we are now doing this. It's a very small garden with only this frame. This press in this frame is it's a small wall with these new plantations and new drawings by Fernanda Fragateiro that are connected really with this, we guess, the strong idea of acting at the same time at all scales. And this is the end of the presentation, just to show in red we have the elements that we are already trying to use with this idea of this detached small things that are relating most of all that specific void that we could reach in this investigation. And we are connecting these red ones with the white ones. And this is, again, the whole area that we can relate, again, the airport with the city of Montijo. And what we would like to do is to keep on doing this research and maybe with other actors, institutional actors, to connect and to bring this conflict also to the project, and after this first role, first approach, which is, I should say, classic approach. So we are using the studio to work. So we are not so strongly for now dealing with the community, but it's also what we would like to do in the near future, is to present this and to face to face people, to ask people about all of these things, all of these ideas, and to leave the studio and to go to the ground to be more connected with the place. But I think that this, with the airport, which is there, I think the conflict, and to start maybe the conversation, the conflict is something that could be really powerful if we can join everything in the same in the same act of project. So we cannot leave things abroad without thinking. I think we need to keep on connecting things. That's our final goal, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentations. I will start by informing that we will open the discussion also to the audience, and whoever is watching in YouTube can write questions in the chat, and we will also read them here. However, as an icebreaker, while you think, I will ask the council, this council that we have set here, to comment on two issues. And the first issue relates to form. Rui, for instance, proposes to restore and protect the forms of the place, to celebrate the richness and diversity, including the less powerful forms of life, human and non-human. But protecting the forms does not by itself have that power, and we've seen that, for instance, in the realm of heritage conservation. You have, we all know, human settlements which have been protected. The form has been protected as a historical heritage. But uses are gradually transformed, and sometimes, lots of times, unfortunately, overtaken by stage setting, lighting and sound, event animation, a magic word, preparation of the place for media purposes, and so identity and the original use is completely turned over. So these precedents maybe show us that as the Montijo creeks, the Montijo canals can also be protected in order that they are crossed by tourist boats instead of this biophysical richness and fishermen's boats. And also in Gerard's and Angela's presentation, we could see that something that also reminds us of the autonomy of form, which is the fact that the tower type seems to be able to be connected to completely opposed poles. I mean, of course, the tower type has always a symbolic importance of dominating territory. It is always a symbol for that, but it can connected to completely different signs, from bottom-up participation to top-down and very institutional programs. The same way, maybe it means that the same type can be charged by communities with different and opposing signs. So the question is, if a form can be charged by the collective with opposite signs, what criteria do we have, we as architects or we as designers, to propose the most precise form? Or reversing the question to non-architects, what do non-architects expect from architecture in situations of conflict, if form can be charged with very different signs? The second issue, I will throw all of them and you do with them whatever you want. The second issue is the scale of operation. Portuguese architects have been involved with public controversies like gentrification and of cities and symbols in public space. But they have been far removed from the controversies relating to new infrastructure. And your presentations are framed by, all of them are framed by the presence of infrastructure. Angela's Talk Towers network, for instance, you imagine a network and it can be seen as a parallel to the existing global data infrastructure. And in fact, nowadays, infrastructures correspond in the individual and domestic realm to the keyword autonomy. And the object that symbolizes this autonomy is the battery. The battery allows availability of energy, allows mobility, allows access to information and remote work. It gives users a period of autonomy, but only in the interval between connection to the networks. The consequence is a new global project to expand large infrastructures, mining, logistics, industrial, energy, and cables and antennas of data, mainly. In this desire, this individual and domestic desire, it is linked to a very large, which is far from being virtual, it's very physical, existing. In fact, it points again towards physical expansion, domestication of nature, extraction, colonization, acceleration. And you seem to propose actions aimed at small-sized collectives, between the domestic scale and the masses. In some cases, you do it on a symbolic level, and or others on a functional level. And the question is, when you imagine places like this, do you see them as being able to some extent, to resist the importance of large scale in people's lives? And maybe you want me to suggest who starts, or maybe you...
So I think you pointed three different but related questions about forms, scales, and networks. In the case that I'm working with in Montijo, that single canals, they're already somehow a form, no? That it's there before we can think about form. So it's really the form that we can deal with. No, it's not. We are not acting with forms, new forms, because it's there already. When I talked about scales, in this case, I was talking about some specific idea about scales in the project acting, which is what we are really want to do in that place is to do quickly projects, so small projects and quickly, and be able to produce the work, be able to construct something. Just to use that idea of Lefebvre pointed the utopia experiment, no? To make it happen almost immediately, to act after this. No? So this is completely different from the idea of doing a huge plan, maybe with a lot of things, small things, but a huge plan, and start to build every small pieces without being tested, occupied, and used by people. So, and I think that's it.
Okay, well, I can try and approach your challenge, Georges. From my point of view, I'm really going to tackle the last part of what you proposed for us to deal with, the kind of contradictions of how architecture can be seen as something that you conserve, preserve, and so-called improve, but how easily that can be appropriated as a mechanism for, as you said, wild tourist usage and so on. Not being an architect is actually in many ways a privilege here, because my point of view is more one of recognizing the duplicity and the complexities of the role of architects and architecture, rather than thinking how can architects act in a way that is, as I understand what your challenge was, that is constructive, i.e. how can architects protect themselves from their work being turned around and used in the opposite way to what is intended. So as an artist, I remember that one of my first learning and most shocking learning moments was to do with African modernism, when I started looking at African modernism, which, as we all know, is only one of the many types of modernisms. But one of the things that really shocked me was the fact that modernism was thought of as a created discourse, if you want to call it that, in Europe, somewhere between Holland and Germany in the early 20th century. And it was really put together as a thought process in order to improve people's lives. But actually, it got appropriated as a tool for colonization and again turned around in its purpose. So my job, or my approach as a visual artist, is more understanding the reading of the duality and the complexities that architecture and architectural practices and projects, like the one you're speaking about, and even the one you're speaking about, although yours is not a formal project, it was something that grew with the energy of the people and the want of the people. So that's what I can sort of contribute to the discourse, is the recognition of the fact that architecture is in permanent conflict with itself. In conflict is a good word for what we have as that. I often think to myself, thank heavens I'm not an architect, because I really think your work is just so much more difficult. Mine doesn't need to sort those problems out. So in a way, I kind of go round the problem. I'm not sure if that this helps at all, but I think that my only answer would be keep reading what you're doing and rereading and be reflexive about what you do, the readings that you do, because otherwise we're just working, sculptors, architects, we're just working to find ourselves in cul-de-sacs that make more problems in an odd way. But just to go back to the modernist thing in Africa, which I think is also a new lesson that I've learned very recently as I've gone back to Mozambique, which is a modernist city, is the fact that the use of architecture is also unexpected, you know. So those buildings were thought of as, the modernist buildings were thought of part of a kind of political apparatus, and they were built for that, and they were successful in that way. But and they represent that, and in that way they're quite offensive as architectural structures. But then independences came along, and the buildings were often appropriated and used in many other different ways. And if you think of Maputo in 2021, independence was in 1975, many of those modernist, amazing colonial buildings were only used as colonial buildings for 6, 7, 10 years, and they have now been used as post-colonial buildings for 50 years. And so they actually have turned a new page yet again and started on another life, and they've integrated. Kids in Maputo don't know the colonial history of the buildings, so they no longer see them as symbols of colonial oppression. And it's on another level. So that is a moment of hope, I think, for architects.
Yeah, I don't know. Not being an architect, I'm not situated in the same position. For me, and the example I was talking about of the ZAD, for me the most important part of all these realizations are the commitment of the people. If people are really committed to change the way they organize their lives, including the way they build their houses and their equipment, all kinds of things can be put into action, including architects, like we saw it in the ZAD. I only gave an example. It's the students of the School of Architecture of Nantes that came and built a house and produced it perfectly. So it just had to be built on the site and used this way. But loads of architects, I think, involved themselves in the action, and what they can do in that case is help people realizing what they want to realize, and also give ideas. I talked about the sewage equipment, for instance. I know that you do not really improvise that kind of thing. You need to know how to do it and where, etc., etc. And I know that people have been involved in that, you know, came with their ability, with their capacity of doing this sort of thing, and they did it. The lighthouse is another example. It's been built by people. Some of them went architects or even carpenters or God knows, but they all got together this knowledge to put this thing together. That's, for me, that's the contribution that people who know a specific skill can help into this kind of action. After that, if it expands, the idea of, the idea in the ZAD is not to expand all over the world, is to try to build the place the way they want it, to build new relations and see if this utopia shows something to the rest of the world, if they want to do the same sort of thing. But they don't have in mind that they're going to build that and then expand it all over the world. They do what they think they should do and see if it works and if it attracts other people, and I think it does. So that's, for me, that's the way the dynamic of the thing works. So obviously, when you reach a certain level, then it has to be, it reaches the institution, and it has to be somehow institutionalized. But it has to be done with the collective, for a start, with the collective of the people. And that's how things can, in my opinion, that's how they can progress.
Yes, so as an architect, it's okay? I need to answer as an architect. So we need help. Yes, we are in this position now. We need a lot of help from you, writers, artists, and a lot of other visions about the way of doing architecture. And what I really would like with this possibility of this project is to start something. It's just to face the institutional municipalities and others, to pay attention to other views about doing something in this so fragile territory, and to act with the conflicts. No, it's another thing. No, it's how to act with the conflicts that they are there. They are every day there, the conflict, and so we are really trying to do some back work, to put things together, just to show them, just to relate them with so many people that we could do. And then maybe we need to start constructing and deal with these ideas with a different kind of architecture. So that's why I don't have, and I don't know if we will have this in the future, I don't know. We don't have any specific project because we don't know how to make this, how to use that territory to build new programs, new facilities, to bring old things also, to connect ruins also with the idea of permanence, and use the ruins also to keep that power of being used for something and then stay there, and then connecting this with new things to come. So maybe, and this is a wonderful question, I guess, wonderful question. What is the next step to this project?
Can I ask you a question? So, if you, I think it's very interesting what you and Fernando are doing, that you are like in the middle of a process, trying to work out what your process is. Like, how do we, as I understood it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a certain amount of like, well, I don't know what the next step's going to be because I don't know what the responded institutions are, what the political conflicts on the ground are, etc. So, in a way, you like learning as you go along. Am I correct in assuming that and understanding that? So, my question is, could you, so it becomes like a prototype for thinking a modus operandum of a new approach to architecture, okay? And we could just keep it as in Portugal so that it doesn't become too ambitious for our conversation. So, could you describe a little bit more what that prototype of operative prototype is, actually, in concrete terms, for a layperson like me?
So I'll try. In concrete, we would like to, it's okay, we'd like to, well, to use these small things to fix some ideas, just this. To use the idea of infiltration, to use the idea of shadow, use some very important things that we need to do and before forms or before we discuss other means of doing architecture, we need to settle some principles, to criteria, you know? So in concrete way, we'd like to do 5, 10 examples of this kind of small things that we can protect from this area, no? And the opposite way, I think, is the way that we are, that we know that in the other side of the river we have Expo, and we have that kind of extensive building waterfront, and we would like to, as a prototype, to keep the voids and to use small elements to connect the voids. And the voids, they are something that we would like to be untouched for the future, for something that is not to occupy, and then invert the idea of occupation, all the voids that are available, no? So this is not so, maybe it's not so concrete, but it's a role. It's something that we need a lot of help from institutions and from the people also to react. No, that's why we would like to make several presentations and to bring a lot of people there to discuss this. That's why it's incredible, this discussion here.
Sorry to carry on. Can I go? But there is a history, for example, in Portugal of a kind of architecture that is participatory. I mean, I'm not an architectural historian, but my interest in architecture has taken me, for example, to very deeply to the SAL project. And that was a comprehensive, large, nationwide participatory architecture project. In some cases more participatory in decision making, in other cases not. But the element of consultation with the population, and that seemed to have been abandoned at some point. So are you talking that perhaps the same question applies here to a broader spectrum participatory architecture or a renewed approach to it?
I think we would like to have this at the same time that we are, because it was difficult to show this, but that black pieces are the small pieces, or the pieces that we are taking as the public elements, because the others are completely private. So they are really about to build something there. So we are trying to at least act on these elements in a different way. So it's more or less this. What we can build in this small network of pieces, it's that idea of the less power. What can we settle there that can keep this beauty of this territory instead of being occupied with, with a lot of construction and buildings and...
Yeah, I'll comment briefly. We're talking about a territory by the river that now is like the most desirable place in the world because it's empty, you can build everything you want, and it's a very fragile and beautiful place, but it's not public. It's owned by private people. And it should be, a public space, because the private people, what they want is to make as much money as they can. They are not going to, they are converting all that in a kind of Disney World or something. So our role in this is to try to learn from the territory, to look and to advise the politicians that don't have all the power because they don't own the lands, what we can do. We cannot buy the land because they are private, but what we can do in the betweens, in the voids, in the spaces that are not totally private now, what can we do there that will give an example to, and how can we bring these private investors to do something that is good for everybody, not just for the sake of making money, It's the thing is that all this conversation is about is, okay, progress. Of course, we cannot avoid progress. We want progress, but progress for everybody, not the kind of progress that Angela mentioned that was born from a lot of modernism projects. The one from Brasilia, for instance, you build Brasilia, and at the same time you build Brasilia and you bring progress to a certain kind of people, you destroy the Amazon. It was the first gesture of building the Transamazônica. It was, the start of a big progress for the white people in Brazil, and it was the start of the genocide and not the start, but a big continuation of the genocide of the people of the Amazon. So how can we keep going, building a future, going forward in progress, but progress for everybody? It's what we're talking about, and not just humans, animals, the landscape, the stones, the mountains. So maybe we can open the discussion,
I just wanted to add something. This joins to what I was talking about before. The difference of the situation is on the ZAD, for instance. Most people, most peasants that were on the ZAD didn't want to make loads of money because they were offered lots of money to leave the place, leave the houses and leave the land, and they refused. They just wanted to keep on working the way they were working. And in fact, they even changed because some of them were doing more or less what we could call some industrial agriculture, and they turned into bio, anti-pesticides and all these things because they experimented this kind of adventure, in fact, with the newcomers. So the situation, it brings me back to what I was saying before. It depends really on what the people want. But what you can do as architects or as historians or sociologists or anything is bring new ideas and see how people use them. But if they don't use them, if they don't take them for them, then it's not going to work anyway. And I was thinking about your project, about what you were saying, is before that, all these places had people that were using them somehow. And what is happening now? Did they all disappear? Did they all forget what it was? Did they all decide that it's not worth keeping or protecting or anything? Or maybe some of them would like to go back to something more constructive than just make money, as the question is.
I think just to answer quickly, one of the big questions is that the place now, all of these places as owners, and they were public before because they were salt places and small industries, and now it's completely gone. So the ruins are there, but the people are not allowed to use them.
let me suggest that we are approaching 2 hours, and we have questions, or at least one question. But I would like to suggest that whoever is feeling like making a question, that the microphone will go around, that you make all the questions, and then we sort it out, and maybe we mix them. Go ahead, please.
Okay, good. Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. I think this representation of Portugal is about architecture and political issues and the way of how people live with architecture on the time, during the time. And with your presentation, I think you spoke about values. So I think the value of the land with Rui, for instance, and Fernanda, the value of the architecture as statement, or the statement, the presentation of the work of art and the architecture as statement by Angela, and the value of utopies, or different ways of thinking by Lambert. So it is interesting and very different ways of seeing our construction as architects and artists in the world, and the relation of the people to what we built. So for the first time, I think we are in a place where we don't know very well where to go. And my question is, if for you, the conflict is or must be between the architecture and people, or the architecture and power, or the architecture and the economy, or the three of them. I mean, what we think that we need, we are continuing building cities because it's our work, it's our what we do, and the question is, what is the conflict that we must value more, and how can we do it in a way that people lives better with what we do? So it is a kind of philosophic question, but I think the exhibition and the shoes of these participations is also to make us think about these questions. That's all. Thank you.
Someone else? Okay, let's close with this one. Thank you.
I'm not the right person to answer this, because I'm the artist here, but boy, he just pushed it on. But I can try a little bit. First of all, I think it's a great question. Thank you very much. It's a challenging question because, and just help me, you spoke about architecture and power, conflict of architecture and power, architecture and people, and architecture and economy, right. So, I don't know, the power and economy are obviously very linked together, as they always are, you know, and the people intertwine in between the power and the economy and the architecture somehow. But it seems to me clearly, just as an outsider, as an artist, and then I'll pass on to the architects, that the focus should be on people and what's right and good and best for the people. As Gerard says very well, what people want. The problem is, how do you harness that? How do architects harness that desire or those needs of the people? And then how do they manage to make that inhabit an acceptable place for power and economy, because, as Fernanda's saying, we also can't do away with development, growth, and improvement, you know, and development, growth, and improvement usually means money. So, but to me, as my answer to that as an artist from the outside would be the first focus should be on people. That's what seems important to me.
Well, I face this question to say that, of course, architecture is dealing with power. It's no doubt. But in a way, we would like to address this idea of architecture really connected with power, but maybe with less power. What is less power? No? What could be a little bit less power? And less power can deal with this possibility of learning again from all the land issues and read again the Ernest Schumacher, for example, read again a lot of things that we lost in this way, and can maybe relate this old ideas, I should say, to the power of the people, because it was really moving, your presentation, and it's wonderful to see what can people do when they want to do, and this is really so powerful that we can have a lot of things like this in different scales, in different territories, with different ambience, not building the same way of building like in Zad, but the other things we can build, and because people can have the power, no? People can do it.
But that brings the question of more state or less state. You know, do we need less state, and in order to allow us to live the way we want? You know, like I was reading a lot about the tribes in Amazon, the people from Amazon, and the decisions are taken by everybody. They take decisions in an unanimous way. And if someone doesn't agree without this unanimous, just leaves and builds his house nearby or far away and starts a new way of life. But here we don't know. Sometimes we don't know if we need less state to leave a space to, you know, decide other ways of living, or if we need more state to protect us from the ones that only think about profit, you know, and don't think about building a world that is a good place for everybody. And this is a question. We don't know if we decide what we need, less state or more state. It's a conflict also.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not, I don't see me as a guide or anything of the kind, so I don't have to decide what people should do or what would be the best for them. I only talk as a basic citizen. But my experience and the experience of the ZAD is the less the state is involved, the more things progress, in fact, because if things had been done the way the state wanted them, no example of the kind would exist. But yeah, the idea of having more state is having more of one or a few person deciding what is good for the people and what is not good for the people. And in my opinion, it's better to let the people decide what is good for them and what is not good for them. But to expand on this question, in fact, what the architects or any other specialist can do is provide ideas because this question of you don't have to be always building savage buildings or anything. I've seen, and I'm not talking of that, but other situations, I have seen architects that could influence sufficiently people who decided, political deciders, to build things that were really useful to the people. So I think this kind of influence can exist too. It just needs to be strongly defended, because it's always obviously a lot more difficult to have the leaders, the politicians do something else than what seems the obvious thing to do for them. At one point, they have to have long discussions with people, but I've seen the experiences of that, like for instance, for sanitary buildings or libraries or various very important realizations for the collectivity. I've seen people who could influence, architects who could influence really the decisions. So it's not just taking power, taking a collective power and influencing things. I think every specialist of some kind, architect or other, can influence if he goes sufficiently strongly, if he defends sufficiently strongly his ideas, in fact.
Sorry? Oh, okay, we have to close. Thank you so much. Thank you to all.